You know, one of the ways that you can get away with ripping off the American people, ripping off the American taxpayer, ripping off people in a city, a state, or a town in this great nation is to hide behind the veneer of helping the helpless, helping the downtrodden, saving people that are just in distress, providing goods and services to the desperately needy. And the thing is, this seems to work each and every time. And a perfect example of this is this story out of St. Louis, where a whistleblower ended up discovering a bunch of stolen money, essentially, in their reconstruction of affordable housing projects, and she paid a significant price for going to the press in order to address this issue and save the taxpayer money. The number one rule of governing in these corrupt cities is that you aid and abet the people in the machine, and you crap on the citizens. This hero broke that rule, and she and her husband face the consequences for it. And we're going to get into this. We're going to cover this from top to bottom. But before we do, I want to say thank you to everybody who signed up over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
And thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform.
East St. Louis Housing Authority Commission, with a lot on its plate at this meeting, the officials terminated the Interim Housing Authority Executive Director, Jacqueline Powell. The head of the Housing Authority Board, Shonte Mueller, recommended she be fired, saying she had discovered Powell gave contracts to fix up housing units to people who should not have received them.
So this is Shonte Mueller, and this is actually the hero of today's story. This is a woman who works in the St. Louis Housing Authority, and she discovered that when they had this interim housing chief that was installed into this position, a bunch of suspicious transactions were going on in what is supposed to be affordable housing for the poor, renovations that were desperately needed in order to help people and restore apartments that are afflicted with rats, rodents, pests of all kinds of sorts, and other ways that properties tend to go into decay over time. However, when she started examining the documents, she ended up realizing that they were way overspending on the renovations for these apartments, ordering unusual things that you wouldn't expect for these apartments, which again are meant to serve the needy, and that there was a deep connection between the person signing off on this and the people doing the work at these elevated prices.
3 companies that's never done business with the East St. Louis Housing Authority were awarded these contracts more than $206,000.
Awarded these contracts by whom?
By the interim executive director.
And what's wrong with that?
Well, we have knowledge that these people are related, and that is against HUD's policy. You cannot award contracts to family members if you have a proven authority.
The contracts were for repair work here at the John DeShields housing project. Contractors are paid to go into wrecked units and fix them up for occupancy. Mueller says the contracts were padded with unnecessary work like custom countertops and deluxe flooring that cost extra.
Now, this is old school, classic corruption and machine politics that we've seen for a long time in this country. And by the way, different variants of this kind of process happen across the nation whenever it comes to government contracts. Well-connected people will often be overpaid to provide inferior services to the public, but because they're doing it under the guise of helping the poor, helping the needy, usually any criticism of this kind of process, any criticism of this government action is immediately deflected as criticism of the most needy in our society, and that is why it is allowed to be so pervasive in our nation. Now, that being said, there's a few other notches here that make it worse, particularly here in East St. Louis. First and foremost is the fact that you have single party rule. Secondly is the fact that that single party that is ruling in this local area happens to be the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party in a lot of local levels operates on a similar model that they used to operate on when the mob was running that town. So everything is going to be connected within the family. In this case, it's a literal family. In the old school cases, it was the mob family, but in reality, what we call this is machine politics. When you get into a position of power, your job is to get as many people that you're connected to, that are your supporters, jobs within the system as humanly possible, and convert those people into voters who will often vote in off-year elections where turnout is depressed in order to perpetuate the machine. So we have somebody installed in a position, like I said, giving contracts to her whole family, and credit to this woman yet again for exposing that at high personal cost to herself.
One company whose owner Shonte identified as Powell's brother-in-law got several contracts between $9,100 and $9,900. Change orders were added to each one of them as high as $6,000, bringing the total repairs for just one apartment to $15,550. Shonte prepared the list of 3 suspected relatives of Jacqueline Powell with work totaling $84,000.
So right here, you could see how this process worked. They needed to repair these units that often get destroyed by the people who live in public housing, let's be honest. Also, these units are not well maintained over time, so often they're just degraded. And what they needed was some basic restoration of the kitchen, some basic installation of the flooring. So they award these contracts to the companies that are well connected to the brother-in-law. Then there's a request for a change order, which increases the price per apartment building, and those requests ultimately end up being approved by the person who happens to be the sister-in-law in public office to the contractor that was initially awarded the lower bid. This way, it looks like what actually happened was they awarded the contract totally fairly. I mean, it's a little suspicious that it's the brother-in-law. And look, as the process was working, they just had to pay a little extra due to things that came up. However, when you look at the line items of all this, you realize that they're doing custom cabinetry, the most expensive way to install this stuff in what are meant to be generic duplicatable units, which is asinine and completely ridiculous. But it's standard fare in terms of corruption, especially in these machine politics kind of cities like East St. Louis.
She believes they got a lot more than that. Shonte says one document listing a questionable bidder requesting $55,000 had Jacqueline Powell's name at the bottom, okaying the deal.
We shouldn't be spending money to get custom countertops, luxury vinyl plank wood flooring. We have people that need to be removed out of units with infestation.
Now, Shonte Mueller did her due diligence right here. She gathered the paperwork, she gathered the receipts, she made the connections, submitted her report, but she went a little bit further than that because she found out that there were additional orders, like the one shown right here for $55,000, with bidders that were incredibly difficult to identify. Now, look, when I criticize these public housing programs, when I criticize the bloat in these kind of deals, when I criticize them for using the veneer of helping the poor in order to loot the taxpayer, loot the treasury, I don't want that to be mistaken for me saying that everybody within this system is bad, evil, and whatnot. In reality and actuality, a lot of people who go into jobs meant to house people who are in need genuinely care about those people who are in need, but the problem is that you're never going to be as good a steward of somebody else's money as you are of your own, and this is exemplified by the fact that we have one whistleblower in this particular instance and who faced the consequences based on the corruption that was exposed. Because, spoiler alert, it wasn't the person who was at the center of the corruption. Initially, the whistleblower and her family were hit hard based on the fact that she refused to drop this issue because she cared more about the taxpayer dollars than anybody else within the corrupt system that she was operating in.
I did reach former Housing Authority Interim Director Jacqueline Powell by phone today. She said, "It is false. It is not what happened." Further saying, "I want to explain what happened. It's not true. It's just not. That's false and made up." Jacqueline Powell had agreed to do a Zoom interview with me today, but backed out. She later sent this text saying, "I know the media likes to shed negative light on East St. Louis because of the foolishness. This is just a distraction plot. This is not true. I promise you, we will talk soon."
So first of all, Jacqueline Powell's quotes sound incredibly childish and ridiculous. It's false. It's not true. It's false. It's fake. It's not true. Also, I'm going to do an interview, but then I'm not going to do an interview because the media just tries to make people look bad, show how ridiculous and absurd this person actually is. But the thing is, they put corrupt people like this into these positions for a reason, and that is because the mechanisms of corruption are actually how these kind of systems work. This is a feature, not a bug. This is why we see bloating in terms of building public housing across the country. Remember, in California, we talked about how they were going to spend something like $500,000 in order to build individual one-bedroom apartments, $500,000 per, and that has already ballooned to $800,000. And guess what? They've completed virtually none of these units. They're only going to end up building like 26 of them, but by the time that they're done, they're going to cost well more than $1 million a piece. And considering it would be probably cheaper to buy people who are homeless full 4-bedroom houses in different parts of California than it would be to build these 1-bedroom apartments, that seems like an insane absurdity until you realize the whole point of the process is for everybody who's connected to local politics to get their slice of the cake, to get their pound of flesh. Because when these $1 million apartments are going to be built in California, guess what? They're going to fall apart immediately, and then they're going to have to hire contractors and end up in scenarios like this, because even though all that money is being put in, they didn't actually use high quality materials in order to make those apartments last long.
But Shonte Mueller says she also found herself in hot water with city leaders over this deal.
I was told that, I should not report anything, and I should resign if I didn't accept this misappropriation of funds. I spoke with HUD and informed of everything that was going on.
She says the East St. Louis City Council voted to fire her too, and says others threatened trouble if she didn't drop the allegations against Interim Director Powell.
Now, this goes exactly to the heart of what I was just saying. The corruption is a feature, not a bug, of a system like this. She exposes this. She finds out that it's blatantly illegal, violates HUD policy. These are federal dollars coming into the city of St. Louis. She brings it to the city council. The city council tells her to stop talking about this, tells her that she needs to resign. Otherwise, she's going to face the consequences for not accepting these appropriations. They all knew what was going down. The corruption is embedded in the system. I'm sure there are more people on the city council benefiting from this than just this one position, because that's how the game is actually played. This is what they do with money, especially money that comes from a different source like the federal government that doesn't seem to have the necessary oversight in order to make sure it's spent efficiently.
Shonte says she was threatened with reprisals, and she says, sure enough, that's exactly what happened. She says right after she was dismissed from the Housing Authority Board, her husband, who had been East St. Louis's assistant police chief, was dismissed from his job on the department after 32 years.
He was told to come to the office and allegedly stated that he was being removed because of what his wife is doing.
Yeah, that's right. Shonte's husband, who was high up in the East St. Louis Police Department for 32 years, was fired shortly after she was fired, and they told him when they fired him that this was meant as a message because it was what his wife was doing, exposing corruption, actually having a spine, actually having a moral foundation, actually taking a stance that was going to be the end of his career as well. 32 years and he's fired from a government position. Think about how impossible that is. In most parts of this country, if you work in a government job for 3 years and a day, it's basically impossible to fire you. Think about all the police officers that have police abuse allegations and whatnot, and how the union goes to bat for them in those respective areas. And if they do get removed from their position, they typically get shifted to another department, and that other department isn't even allowed to check their history. But all of a sudden, when you start questioning the appropriation of federal funds, when you start questioning illegal contracts being gifted to members of the family of the person signing those orders, a senior person in the police department can get fired just like that. Over right there, head cut off in order to send a message. This is why I compared it to mafia style. This is why I compared it to machine style, because anything that goes against the machine needs to be eliminated. Anybody who goes against the family needs to be taken out. And that's exactly what happened. And honestly, we should be praising this woman because she wasn't even just trying to save money for St. Louis taxpayers. She was trying to save money for all of us as taxpayers, because again, HUD is federal money. That's taxes that are taken from you and me nationwide and redirected to help the needy in East St. Louis, not to line the pockets of the well-connected.
Shonte got her job back for now because the council didn't follow proper procedures. Her husband is still out of a job. Still, Shonte says she reported all she knew to HUD and to law enforcement.
So the FBI is involved.
Yes.
Now, they broke procedure. She reported this to the FBI, as this is basically organized crime going on in East St. Louis, yet they're still trying to remove her from office, even though she was able to get back on a technicality. However, her husband is still gone. Again, 32 years of law enforcement, and you're removed not because of something criminal that your wife did, but because your wife was trying to expose criminality. It's absolutely insane, the level of corruption that goes on in these left-wing cities in our nation, and we have to praise people like this who are willing to fight for the taxpayer, because there are so few of them in government, as represented by the fact that everybody else in the government went to cram down this kind of agenda on their taxpayers and fire anybody who dares to question it. So Shonte Mueller, you have my respect. You went above and beyond. You're still in the fight, and I absolutely love you for it, and I'm so sorry for what happened to your husband. I can only hope that after 32 years he can collect a pension or something, but honestly, work is not just about money. A lot of people derive purpose from work, and considering most departments you can get a pension after 20 years and he was there for 32, there must have been a lot of love in that, not to mention the fact that he was in a high up position. Maybe he was going to eventually get the top position, maybe he's a lifer in that career, and that was ripped away from him because his wife shared a similar noble calling that he did that got him to serve in law enforcement. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the corruption in East St. Louis. Till next time.